So what I am going to do is to say hello to everybody. We're just waiting for some people to log in. We've got quite a few people on this call, so just while we are waiting for people to log in on this hour-and-a-half lecture with Master Acting Coach Jane Drake Brody, could I get everybody who's currently logged in to please, in the question section just underneath on your control panel, just to say hello and that you can hear and see both of us, just so we know that you can hear and see us for the duration of the forthcoming lecture. There we go. Great. So it seems like everybody can hear and see, which is important. First things first, you make sure that you have your pad of paper and your pen, and make sure that you are taking down some very good notes, because there's a lot of information, very in-depth information coming at you. And I'd firstly like to say welcome. This is the second webinar that we've run with Jane Drake Brody ahead of her June 11th lecture and Superscenes Intensive in London from Friday the 24th of June to Sunday the 3rd of July. Jane is very, very, very experienced. She's been teaching acting for 40 years. She's been, in her time, not just an acting teacher, she's been a casting director, an agent, she's been a theatre director and an actress herself. She is best placed to teach on all aspects of the business. As she says, she teaches about the art, the science, and the business of acting. Some of her former students include Golden Globe and Oscar-nominated actor Michael Shannon, who is currently being seen in Midnight Special, and also the forthcoming film with Kevin Spacey about Richard Nixon and Elvis Presley, and also Eric Stonestreet of Modern Family, who was also an Emmy Award winner. So please, allow me to introduce Jane Drake Brody. Over to you, Jane.
Hi, I'm Jane Brody, as I think Paul said. I guess the biggest question for me that you may want to know is, first of all, who on earth am I? And I guess the answer to that is that I am someone very like you. I always wanted to be an actor all of my life. I started studying acting after I saw a production of Hamlet, and I thought, I have to do that. I tried to do everything I possibly could. I went to universities. I studied with private teachers. I finally ended up studying with a teacher, maybe some of you know the name Michael Shirtliff, and from him I was able to move ahead. And it was such an inspiring thing to study with a teacher such as that, that I decided I wanted to teach in the same way he did, to share what I knew. And it turned out that I really liked it. I liked teaching and I liked directing. So kind of basically that's who I am. I've been a professional actress for many years, and a teacher and a director and a wife and all of those things that one does. The title of this program today is Stanislavsky for the 21st Century. And I guess the question is why, if I can find my paper, I don't know where it is, why should we study Stanislavsky? What's the point? I found it. Why a man that was 100 years ago should we even pay any attention to? And so I've been trying to find that out myself. And in looking for what Stanislavsky meant, I've developed a new method of work based on his work called Superscenes. And I'm going to be talking about Stanislavsky and Superscenes throughout this broadcast. Superscenes, I'm going to tell you right now, but I'll tell you again, it's a rehearsal and a training technique that is focused on complete surrender to the physical actions underlying the language of the script in a safe environment. So that's what a superscene is. We'll talk about it later. Why did I develop this approach? And that's a good question. For many years, I taught scene study and code reading and all sorts of different approaches to acting and ways of solving problems in action. And I found that that the actors that I was working with were generally afraid to be theatrical in any way. That is, by theatrical, I don't mean over the top and I don't mean too much. What I mean is they were unable to do things that weren't ordinary or everyday or banal, thinking that that was realism. I don't think it is, because a play takes place on the day when everyone's life is upset and things are not natural or normal. The play takes place on a day when the world is upset, and we do things that we are unused to doing, things that challenge us, things that stretch the characters, how we want to put it, methods and ways of working. So I developed first a system where I told the actor that I wanted them to do something which was socially unacceptable, but completely in line with what they felt that they needed to get from their partner in the scene. And from that, I began to work on primal action. You might want to call it action without restraint. You might want to call it socially unacceptable action. And I began working on that, and I trolled through all the kinds of psychology and sociology and philosophy and other acting theoreticians to find out more that I could do. And when I finally finished it, it was Stanislavsky whose theory of physical action seemed to me to be the smartest and the most advantageous to actors. So I'm not going to talk about that right this minute. I will in a minute, but I think we want to look at where Stanislavsky comes from. Stanislavsky, most of you know, was a Russian actor and director, but more than anything, he was a theoretician for acting, and he wanted desperately to find a method of work for actors that they could rely on, and yet that was creative and inspirational to both them and the audience. He was looking for what he called the creative mood, and how did one make that happen a lot. He was born in 1863. For those of you who don't know what that means, it's right during the time when women wore those great big hoop skirts. It's the time of the American Civil War. It's a time of Victorian values. And he lived through Victoria's reign, even though he was in Russia. That kind of prudish behavior, that kind of sexually frightened behavior, the kind of overly restrictive behavior for both men and women was the way everyone lived. Women didn't show their ankles. You never took your clothes off. Men swam in long swimsuits in the same way that women did, although women were more covered. And so he was restricted in some of the things he could do, and I think that's an important issue in his development as an acting teacher. The other thing that is interesting to note is that Stanislavsky, whose real name is, let me think here now, Alexander Sergeyevich Alexeyev, was a member of the upper crust. He was a wealthy man because of his parents' wealth, even though his family came from not wealthy merchants at all, but his father and his grandfather had built up their business to such a degree that they were as wealthy as any of the Walmart scions or any of the wealthiest people in the world. And as a result, he was able to support himself and not have to work all the time, as well as support a lot of his theatrical endeavors. His parents didn't want him to use his real name because being an actor was considered somewhat inappropriate for a gentleman in this period, so he did change his name. He was a man who first wanted to be an actor, went to an acting school, didn't like it, thought that it was way too wooden, way too restricted. Then he went and studied opera. He wanted to be an opera singer, and he tried to use some of those methods as he started doing plays, just in little bitty places all over Moscow. He was in back rooms of bars, and he was in upstairs of lofts of unused clubs, or even clubs, men's clubs, women's clubs, social clubs that had some sort of auditorium. Before that, he had had his own theater that his parents built for him as a little boy at his brothers and sisters, he had a lot of them, on their own estate. So he was always experimenting with the way an actor has to work, regardless of where they were working. His dates coincide with Freud. Freud is just a little bit, I think, younger. However, Freud's ideas of psychology and things like that certainly did influence him. He was also influenced by at Pavlov's dogs, and tried to figure out we could make a Pavlovian response in the actor. He was looking for a scientific way of making acting predictable. Science right now is the same as what he was doing then. Figure out what is predictable, what you can do with an experiment, whether the experiment works, and then get your information out to the general public. So I guess my question is, what would Stanislavsky do if he were alive today? And I think that his theory of physical action would have been expanded. To talk a little bit more about the theory of physical action, you might call it psychophysical action. Stanislavsky had gone through many different ways of trying to get actors to have emotions. And he did affective memory, he did recall, all of those exercises that I think you're pretty familiar with in general. That is, find what hurts inside of you and somehow try to hook it to the words or the script or the character or the partner, however you want to parse that out. And it wasn't working for him. As a matter of fact, many of his fellow actors in his various companies, he had quite a few, dropped out because it was disturbing to them psychologically. In fact, Michael Chekhov, many of you know who that is, had a nervous breakdown as a result of some of the experiments that they were doing. He kept looking, he kept looking. He went to yoga, which provided him with an understanding of being in the moment and being centered. It still wasn't what he was looking for. While he was looking for all of this, the biggest event in his life and the lives of many others occurred, the Russian Revolution. As a wealthy man, he was under suspicion. All of his properties were confiscated, and he was not impoverished, but he had lost a lot of his money. However, he was working in such a way that the Stalinist regime finally wanted him to represent them as the head of the Moscow Art Theater. He had to tread very carefully because there were spies on his staff. Other acting theoreticians had been murdered. Other theater directors had been murdered because the Stalinists didn't want any emotion at all. They didn't want any religion or sense of spirit at all. Both of those things got in the way of Stanislavsky's experimentation. So he kept working secretively sometimes and changed his language a lot. So when you read his books, and by the way, I'm going to show you that book in a minute, he wrote 3 books, but in reality he didn't. A woman who was trying to save his life and keep him alive from the United States, Elizabeth Hapgood, she was the ambassador's wife, forced him to publish so that he would be famous enough to avoid being eliminated. She forced him to publish 2 or 3 times. He had been writing all along, but he wrote and wrote and wrote and never felt he was ready to publish. However, he finally put out the 3 books in that kind of jangled order that you're aware of today: Actor Prepares, Building a Character, and Creating a Role. Now we realize that much of the language in those pieces was influenced by the Soviets' need to have language that didn't have anything to do with the soul or with the spirit. And a lot of what Stanislavsky believed, and a lot of what most of us actors know, is that it has a lot to do with your soul and your spirit. So he began working, oddly enough, on what's called the theory of physical action, which was his final work, and I think the strongest work. He didn't necessarily throw out all of the other stuff, but he focused on action. Action which is physically based, even if it is verbal. So let's talk a little bit about what that means, how that works. You need to think about the body and the mind as being one thing. And so he would consult now, because that split between body and mind is no longer there, he would probably have consulted the scientists working today as he did then. He consulted, or he read, I should say, quite a bit about human behavior as the Freud and Pavlov and all of those people were working. Today, however, scientists are able to see a lot more, and some of the leading scientists working in that human behavior have isolated certain elements that are the best for actors to look at. Some of these scientists are the name Damasio. It comes up. I sent you something for that. Rizzolatti. Oh goodness, my favorite, Galeazzi. They're all working in Italy, oddly enough. There's a lot of people working all over the world, but the Italians were the first ones to discover a thing called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons were the first thing I heard of that made me start looking at the scientific discussions going on. What is a mirror neuron? I'm going to try to read it a little bit. So a mirror neuron is a neuron in the motor area of your brain. That is the thing that messes with your muscles, the same as it says, oh, I want to grab, or oh, I want to reach, or oh, I want to slap, whatever. And that neuron forces your body to do what you wish to do. It's in your muscles. It is responsible, again, for muscle activity. Now, these mirror neurons, which are muscle neurons as well, fire not only when we do something ourselves, but when we observe other people doing things. For instance, if you are watching a soccer match or a ball game or a dance, anything you've ever done physically, notice how your body is involved and you are in it. That is a function of mirror neurons, because the dancer's neurons are telling them her muscles or his muscles to move, and your own brain is firing at the same place in pretty much the same time, except that you don't actually do the movement. Now, what is interesting about this is it is not, the movement is not the thing that's mostly observed. It is the intention to move that we pick up unconsciously at the same time as the body of the performer is intending to move. Well, if you think about that for a minute, that's why the word mirror happens. And mirror neurons actually function before, let me make you sure that you know this, before the intention has been accomplished. It logically follows then that the audience is far more affected by what the actor does than what he says or what she feels. Those aren't the things that the audience is picking up on. Of course, they're picking up on those things in a certain way. But it is the action that actors are putting forth most that communicate best to the audience. And if you think about it, that's pretty simple to understand. An actor is someone who does actions. And a play is a whole bunch of completed actions, which becomes one big action. Hamlet, for instance, is to avenge the death of his father. That's an action. You understand that, I think. I hope. If you don't, write me a question and I'll ask you later. I'll talk about it later. The other part of research that's going on that is important for actors is memory research. Memory research says that we remember those things that are important to us, that create an emotional response in us. It comes from our sensory life. It comes from smell, sight, taste, touch, hearing, and what happens is something comes into your eyes or your skin or your ears, and it goes to a switching station kind of in the middle of your brain, way down in the middle, which is called a hippocampus. It's called a hippocampus because it's shaped like a seahorse. Don't ask me why. I don't even know that hippos are seahorses, but nonetheless, it's a hippocampus, and it functions to eliminate those things that are unimportant to your survival or your pleasure, and to accentuate those things which come in through your senses that are important to your survival or your pleasure. Those things are then broken down into their elements, sensory elements, and then they go back to what is called the amygdala, which is your primal brain. The amygdala is the brain that we share with all other animals. It is our animal life source. And they are broken down there into the various elements of sight, sound, color, things like that. When you want to recall them, the language that you recall with your frontal cortex, that is where you do all of your logical thinking, hears that word or that sound or whatever and brings forth the memory. Now, the memory doesn't come forth exactly as it was because it's reconstructed every time it is recalled. And it is reconstructed from its elements, and it's reconstructed for that moment in time. So your memory is not exactly 100%, well, it's not reliable at all, really. How does this affect us as actors? It means that we need to memorize those huge things, images, that will be stored in our primal brain, in our amygdala. We want to store them. When we store lines, we're really storing images, or as Stanislavsky would say, a film strip in your mind. So what is an image? An image is anything that you receive in a sensory way that you either recall or that is somehow constructed by you, or that is actual. The brain doesn't separate the difference between imagination, images that you imagine, and images that you have seen. That's an interesting part of our own work, because the brain will believe whatever you put into it in a way. That's how false memories work. That's how we remember the smell of our grandfather's basement when we stand at a particular place, or the feel of our mother's skin when we sit in a particular chair. The images are the things that promote an emotional response. And in order for memory to work, the hippocampus, that little seahorse, needs to be flooded with the chemistry of emotion. I'm not going to name the chemicals or all of that, but understand that what happens in the hippocampus is that the images get washed over with all of these chemicals, and they get sent back to the amygdala, to the primal brain, so that the images are bathed in emotion and are already potent emotional cues for you. I want to talk for just a second about how this all works. The way we function is we have an image. It could be something real, as I look at my husband, or it could be as I think about my old choir director from high school. Wouldn't matter. That image, if it's strong enough, excites an emotional response, which brings forth the memory, and that response wants action. So it goes like this: image to emo to action. Doesn't mean you're going to fulfill the action, but it does mean that the body wishes to get rid of the chemistry of the emotion in order to find a balance. We seek balance constantly. We are biological beings, and we want to have the status quo. Well, you may not want to, but your body wants to be regulated in such a way that there isn't strong emotion upsetting its balance chemically. And strong emotion, whether for joy or for grief or for rage, all of those animal feelings need to be governed. And that governing is a part of the restriction of the given circumstance. The governing is a part of how, why we have a frontal cortex and what we call a prefrontal cortex. Humans are biological beings, essentially. We are all exactly the same biologically. We differ in the actions that we either repress or express, and we differ in our given circumstances that tells us what to express or repress. Our biological brains are first and foremost the control system for our biological bodies. Biological bodies move and act in real world surroundings. So we're always getting all of this input. Our amygdala decides what is important to keep and what isn't. The amygdala then gets that message so that we can either flee, survive, have joy, have sex, whatever we're going to do. So as Stanislavsky looks at these things, he still is going to put them into his own viewpoint. And when you read Stanislavsky's book, here's the latest one that I think is probably the best. It could be better translated, everybody knows that. But what it does is it pulls all of his work together in an understandable way, and the translation is better than the half-good translations, the ones that are from the late 30s to 50s. If you look at Stanislavsky's whole work, it all involves action, which we've been talking about, interaction, which we will talk about, and given circumstances. I've already mentioned that word, and I think you probably already know it, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the influence of given circumstances, because that's what makes us differ. Given circumstances are images. And any of the given circumstances within the text, within the play, need to be examined by the actor and connected emotionally to his or her own biological being. So those images actually connect you chemically to the play itself. The other thing about given circumstances that I think people sometimes miss, and there's a lot to say about it, it's the environment. It's every noun in the play. Those all give you given circumstances. Is what are the rules of the game in the world of that play? And it can be the history, if it's a history play, but also every playwright constructs a play based on his or her own understanding of the rules of the game. And that's what style is. Style is just what are the rules of behavior for men and women in a particular time, in a particular place. My old teacher, Michael, used to say that it was just geography. And I'm kind of beginning to understand what he means by that, because where you are, when you are, predicts a lot who you are and what you're allowed to do, what you repress and what you express. So it's action, interaction, given circumstances. A part of the action is difficult to understand because we use that word action so much. We use it for everything. There's a best way to look at it. And I'm going to read this. I got this from another theoretician, and he said, I believe it was he, action is intentional, purposeful, conscious, and subjectively meaningful activity. It differs from activity or simple behavior because it has a target. In other words, it's not lifting up a coffee cup. It's throwing a coffee cup at someone across the table. The activity of lifting up the coffee cup is probably important for you to image and all of the things that you do in a normal acting class. But more importantly is what is the difference between an action and an activity. Action, in this definition, implies someone on the other end, something on the other end. It becomes interaction. When we see interaction on stage, we're reading all those mirror neurons and we are watching the ball of concentration go back and forth between one actor and 5 actors or 2 actors or what have you. And so it's far more meaningful to the audience because they are physically affected by intention. Their mirror neurons are firing along with you. So the actor on stage, when an actor says, gee, the house is hot tonight, or it's a good audience, I think, although this is probably not scientific at all, I think that we are picking up all those brain waves that are firing at a particular level, and we feel that in ourselves because mirror neurons work from actor to actor, actor to audience, and audience to actor. They can do no other. That's what they do. As we look at action, we say to ourselves, well, the play doesn't call for me to be physically active. It's just a discussion. Oh, think of Shaw or any of those people. Well, that's called verbal action. Verbal action is able to make abstract thought understandable. It's able to delineate small things. However, under all verbal action, there is primal action. There's primal need. It is the primal need that supports the action which is seen above the water, let us say, above the language. There is another level. So this verbal action is physically based, right? You understand what I'm trying to say? So that even though the verbal action may be to explain, the real action of that is probably to, let me think here, pound a spike of understanding into his head. It would depend on who you're talking to as to what the action actually is, because the action lives between you and the other person. It doesn't live in underlining what the line may mean. The word hello has no action in it. It would depend on who you are greeting. If you are greeting the ghost of your father like Hamlet, you probably just don't say hello. It's probably something else in it. The action of running into your father's arms and hoping to be rescued, or of, in Hamlet's case, of testing the ghost to see if it really is his father. So it's not, there's text and there's subtext. Subtext is not a, let me think here, how would I put it? It's not another way of saying the text. So the subtext of hello is not hi. The subtext of hello depends on what the problem in that relationship is, because that's what's being used to solve the problem in the relationship. That's where the interaction takes place. As far as we all know, externalized interaction is the strongest way to do it. The second thing we need to talk about when we're talking about action, and I think I've just said it, it depends on who you're talking to and what your role in that relationship may be. So when I talk to my mother, I speak differently than when I talk to my sister or my husband or my father or my child. I speak differently, my intentions are different, and my needs that need to be fulfilled through that interaction are different. These primary relationships, familial relationships, are the basis of all of drama. They form us a recognizable basis for action. We understand how we're supposed to behave anyway with our mother, father, sister, brother. And there are only 6 relationships, and they're all primally based, and they're all archetypal in nature. You all understand, because we have it in the gods, we have it in the Bible, we have it everywhere. The relationship of father to son, mother to daughter, sister to sister, brother to brother, lover to lover, husband to wife, wife to husband, friend to friend. And beyond that, everything else is just a spin-off of that idea, that there are really 6 basic relationships. Now I'm going to try and say them. Okay, parent, husbands and wives, married couples. It could be also gay married couples, doesn't matter. Then there's siblings, sisters and brothers. Then there's extended family. Then there's lovers, which are not the same as husbands and wives. I think you can all tell me that for sure. And then let me see, what else is there? There is, I'm missing one. I said extended family, husbands, wives, siblings, friends, friends of the same sex, friends of the opposite sex. In reality, they probably are more representative of sisters or brothers, but it depends on how you look at it. There's also the relationship to God, which some people include. I don't. I think that God is just your grandfather, unless you're really evolved, which I am not. In any event, these are all the relationships that are. And so with those relationships, there's only a certain number of plots that you can make, only a certain number of stories. There's a man who counted them one time, and he said there's 136 plots. Polti, P-O-L-T-I. There are other people who say, oh, there's only 2 plots. Some people say there's 16 plots. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that the story is contained through the relationships that are in it. And the play happens on the day when all of those relationships are threatened, are in trouble. And all of the people in it have to do actions which are unusual for them on an ordinary day, but quite usual for them when the stakes are heightened. Now, if you think about it, 6 relationships, maybe 136 plots. You can pretty quickly go to, when did all of these things start? At least I go there because I love history. And it all starts with myth and archetype and ritual. So what is a myth, and why should we as actors think about it at all? A myth is I just wrote this, so I want to read it. A myth is an ancient story that emerged from the body brain to serve the needs of a tribe or a community in order to help them make sense of their lives. For a myth to achieve and maintain its power, it needs a ritual. The theater is a ritual. A ritual is a way for a community to come together and to cope with difficulties or celebrations. It is a repeated activity. Doesn't have to be, I'm not talking about the ritual of washing your face. I'm talking about the ritual such as marriage or a funeral or a bar mitzvah. Those are all rituals that are put in place to help the community move from one place to another. For those of you who want to read about it, there's a researcher, I'm going to murder his name. His name is Mircea, M-I-R-C-E-A, Eliade, E-L-I-A-D-E. I don't know if that's the way you pronounce it. But he talks about the ritual. And in order for a ritual to happen, one needs people who are going to be the leaders of the rituals. The myth is reenacted or reborn through these reenactments. For the actor, therefore, as the leader of the ritual, the actor finds the original archetypes to play in the ritual. Now, let me make sure that we understand what I mean by that. An archetype is the emanation, oh, I wrote it somewhere, don't have it. An archetype is an emanation of our own primal needs. So, for instance, you may have a god who is terribly, terribly wrathful, like Thor, the thunder god. That is a response to our own rage, but we put a name on it and we put it outside of ourselves as some sort of god so that we can then have some sort of control over it. So these archetypes are the characters in the myths. All of our own plays, therefore, have their birth in the original stories. The original stories, these 36 plots, all made by the Etruscans and those people even before the Greeks and the Romans, have some sort of an embedded power in them when they are examined by humans. They still have some resonance in them. It's as if they were buried, but the bones are still there, and all you need to do is to read the story and it gets fleshed out again. That is the power that we want to deal with in the theater. So for an actor, the use of archetype as opposed to stereotype carries not only the power to do big actions, extreme primal actions, which in ordinary life he or she wouldn't do, but they also have the capacity to put us in touch with our own primal, elemental natures. When that happens, you feel, when you're working on stage, somehow free. Your mind kind of clicks out. Psychology is not important. Gods and heroes don't have psychology. They just act. And I think that as I work with students, the most difficult thing to get them to do is to stop thinking and start doing. And yet I know your acting teachers say that all the time. What do I think is the problem with that? Why do actors do that? I think it's got to do with their desire to create characters. It's got to do with character creation rather than allowing the character to emerge naturally through the situation, the given circumstances, and the image work that the actor does. Actors, of course, are better able to do actions than to become someone. I defy you to become anything that you are not. Your own humanity is sufficient. Leave psychology to the psychologists, okay? I'm trying to mess with this paper here and it's not doing well. There I go. Leave psychology to the psychologist. Now I'm in trouble. I got to do this. Here we go. Got it. I want to go back for a minute to the ritual because I forgot to say this. When we enact the ritual of theater, we do it to create a tighter community safely through potentially dangerous situations. Think about the tribal people. Any changes in the chemistry of the community needs to be dealt with in the same fashion that emotions in our own bodies are dealt with to go back to a pre-existing balance. Ritual is a safe way that a tribe, a community can be found to release any strong emotion. Today in the United States is Memorial Day. It is a ritual where we raise the flag, where we go to the graves of veterans, where we lay wreaths or flowers on those graves. Frequently there are readings or some sort of services in order to help us with this Memorial Day. This is an ancient, ancient ritual going back to before anyone ever even wrote things down, of honoring our slain soldiers, of honoring our community, of honoring our community's values. It is a ritual. So I'm going to go back now, talking about character. I think when you think about characters, rather than stepping outside and deciding in your own little bitty brain who this guy is and who this gal is, which will lead you nowhere but back into your own little bitty brain, I think if you simply do the action, something may occur. I find that when people try to construct characters, what they really do is diminish the humanity of the character. They play a stereotype which only has one color, one thing. Whereas an archetype opens up to all faces of that god or goddess. Even in the Bible, you have the God who is wrathful and punishing. You have the God who is nurturing and loving. Those two things exist within the same God, as they exist in you. Characters tend, when I see actors do them, to only have one thing they do. I was watching Harry Potter the other night. And the interesting thing about Harry Potter is the villains seem always to find a moment or two of regret or of doubt or of surrender to their own better selves. They don't remain exactly straightly only doing one thing. I'm thinking of Severus right now, Severus Snape, played by Alan Rickman, rest in peace. If you watch that more, you can see all kinds of things going on in him. Repressed, not expressed. Remember, we're all the same biologically. We differ in our given circumstances. Once you have imaged the given circumstances of the play, however you image them, whether you actually go to a diner or whether you just think about a diner, doesn't matter, although if you go to one and the play's set in one, it's probably better because you get more input. But whether you're imaging or not, finally, the emotion makes you need to do action. If that is so, if you walk the walk and talk the talk of the character, quote unquote, through the imagined circumstances, that doing will provide a piece of communication and belief in you and in the audience that is far better. My camera's just slipped, I think. That is far better than if it were somehow, let me fix this bit here, if it were somehow communicated to them who this guy is and who this gal is. Again, we're going back to the idea of mirror neurons, because the audience is not going to watch you show them, and they're going to read, you're showing me who you think I want to see. Hold on, we're adjusting the camera a little bit. How's that? Better? There, tech people are adjusting the camera. Okay. So I think that the getting rid of the concept of who I'm supposed to be and simply doing what you're supposed to do as a human in a particular set of circumstances alleviates so much stress, so much difficulty, and allows your emotional life to help you, to come to you. Because the emotional life can't come to you when you're thinking about how would this guy do this, how does she do this, regardless of how many times you did it, and also repressing any instinct that you may have, because most actors decide that their characters wouldn't do the very things the actor is also afraid of doing. So I developed Superscenes in order to allow these primal instincts to come forward. And I think that it's necessary to contact the physical, the biological, which is the underlying element of all communication. A superscene, therefore, once again, is a scene wherein I wrote this specifically because I want to be clear, two or more actors who have examined the text or the script, found the given circumstances, decided what energies, what is the basic story here, what are the basic archetypes here in this story from my perspective, the actor's perspective. Then they enter into a physical confrontation using the powers and tactics of the archetype. So if I want to become Thor, the thunder giver, I'm going to use that energy of rage and yet construction, because lightning also destroys the forest, but it also makes room for more birth, if you think about that for a minute. So I'm going to use that energy in the super scene as my jumping off place. We're going to show you the super scenes in a minute. One of the most important elements is to get the actor to surrender to this power within them, which creates the stereotype, the archetype, rather than the stereotype. Another important part of the super scene is the emergence of emotions and understandings that are hidden by the intellect, by the prefrontal cortex, by all the psychology and thinking, and hidden by the language. Super scenes take actors out of their heads. Now, I'm going to show you a super scene done in a class of mine. We prepared to do super scenes with 4 earlier, less difficult physical exercises in order that the super scene can be safe, in order that the super scene can really help the actor to channel what's going on and to respond rather than to have fear for his or her own life. And you will see in this super scene that we're going to watch, and I think you need to cue it up just a little bit. I'm going to ask the tech guy to cue it up just a little bit ahead of where it is. You will see these 2 actors, both of them grad students of mine, and a couple of years ago, one of whom, the young man, Bernie, who really had been a business major or something and decided to switch to acting, and Leah Ayres, who is who was more of a spokesperson for things and not a lot of acting training in the past. The scene that I'm going to show you is one that we did for this kind of a demonstration about 3 months after we'd actually worked on these scenes. So one of the things about a super scene is that the work stays in your body. The muscle memory takes over for you, and you don't have to worry quite so much about what did I do, what did I say, because your body knows. Another part of super scenes that I didn't explain was that your memory is so strong that it doesn't take as long to memorize a script at all, because the memory in your body starts happening. I'll talk about that later. So I think we're ready to show the super scene, and I hope it's going to work technically. Here we go. We're trying. Okay. Tech people are working. And we're coming. It's showing. Now, as you watch this, these people are walking, and what I'm asking them to do as they walk is to get in touch with that energy. What is the god or goddess or hero that they're going to use? I can't remember, frankly, what they're using, nor does it matter all that much. One of the things that Bernie, I know, was experimenting with was what's called the eternal child, who always wants his mother to take care of him, who never grows up, though kind of a Peter Pan. He also was experimenting with a nurturing god, a god that rescues. I'm not sure what he finally came up with. She was working on a real Mother Earth kind of god, I think, but more a Medea before she kills her children. This play, I'm sorry I didn't say, is from a play called In the Blood by Susan Laurie Parks. And this is the last scene in the play. As they walk, they're encouraged to move. I'm going to change this over here a little bit so I can see it. They're going to move finally to confront each other, because conflict, as we all know, is the essential part of action. You don't do an action unless you need to change somebody in some way. I think they're getting ready to confront. Not sure. Oh, there's me. Bad hair day, I'll tell you right now. And some of my other students. Okay. We're moving. I didn't cue it up quite enough, but stick with it, kids. You'll see it. Okay. The super scene is going to begin pretty quick. We are using here the concept of pushing, pulling, holding, or releasing. Right here, he is essentially pulling her with him. He's not pulling her to any place. He is now pushing her, as you can see, and she's going to start responding to that by holding, stopping that action, and then releasing. That corresponds to a beat in a scene. Okay, the hold and the release is there, a lot of communication. There he goes after her, stalking her again, but she's fronting him. She's not going to let it. So in some ways, she's both pushing and pulling, isn't she? But he's pushing with his chest. Look at his chest. Look at where it is. He's trapping her. There they go. There's a standoff here. Who's going to break? That moment of suspense, very important in terms of the scene itself, any scene. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Moving rhythms. Moving rhythms. He's fighting harder. She's fighting harder. She's resisting him. She has to decide not to resist or to resist. He finds a new tactic here. They hold, and he releases her very tenderly, as we can see here. He's trying to save her in some way, make her something that he wants. There's the hold. Now he's going to release away. Sorry. He's going to release away. There he goes. She gives up at this point, which is something actors forget to do a lot, and yet we give up in life all the time before we reattack or rework what we're doing. There she goes. Oh, looks like she's on the offensive. Yep, there she goes. Now, if you notice, she's very light, slight woman. He is built like he is, I believe, an athlete, and yet she has her own tactics to use. She attacks him now. Who's going to be? Oh, she fell. He says, "Get up." He pulls her up. There probably should have been a hole then. There they are, and they are down, and she is now got him. This moment of communication is the most important of the whole scene. He gives up. She decides to leave him there, not knowing quite what's going to happen. There we go. Now, when we were doing these super scenes, we weren't trying to recreate the text of the scene at all. What we're trying to do, there's another actor coming in to help, what we're trying to do is to create the subtext within the relationships. So when the scene comes in, we actually speak the lines to the actor. We drop the lines in. Looks like we're watching sports, doesn't it? Okay, she's got to get herself together. In the play, the character believes that there is a hand of fate, a big bright hand coming down from the sky at her. It's shining red. It looks like the sun to her, but the sun gone red. It is another relationship for her in the play. So in a way, it's a three-person scene. I'm going to shut up.
Jane, can you hear me? Jane, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can.
I can't hear the sound on the video. Can you turn the sound on?
You can't hear the sound on the video?
Thank you.
I'm going to try. They can't hear the sound on the... We're trying to get the sound up for you.
Is it here?
Thank you.
Is that better?
Not yet.
I'm going to stop it for a moment while we do the technical thing. Put me back on, will you, Walter? Put my screen back on. While we're waiting, it seems to me that we could take a few questions if that's possible. Would that be all right with you, Paul?
Sure, I'll just jump in. And what you saw there in the beginning was the physical exercise, you would say, Jane, to jump in.
I can't see the screen, Paul, so...
So what you saw there was the physical exercise, which leads into the actual scene work itself. And part of this webinar was also to ask questions of Jane. So any questions that you have on anything related to acting in any way, shape, or form. So just remember, Jane has not also been a teacher for 40 years. She's also been an agent, a casting director, a theatre director, an actress. She knows everything. So there's a question box on your control panel. That's where we can connect, and that's where we can read and listen to your questions. So just start typing in your questions there. And while that is going on, I'm going to jump in.
Paul,
Yeah.
I think we should take some questions now.
Yeah, I'm just taking the questions now.
Okay. If you would say them to me.
Sure. I'll do that, Jane. Just before that happens, I just wanted to let people know that Jane is running a London workshop from the 24th of June to the 3rd of July. It's a 33-hour intensive at the Rag Factory, 10 minutes from Liverpool Street. And the normal price on this workshop is £550, but because you have joined the webinar today, we're giving you a special webinar price of £499. There's more information at paulmclaughlin.co.uk, which is my website, and you can go onto the workshops tab. We'll also send you an email after this webinar with the recording, with some handouts, and also some more information on how you can book onto that. And then the last thing, Jane is running a free lecture on Saturday, the 11th of June at the Rag Factory. If you'd like to book for that, you need to send me an email, paul@paulmclaughlin.co.uk. That's MCLAUGHLIN.co.uk, just to register your space. I think we have some questions. I'm going to jump in.
Okay. I'm hearing them, but not seeing them.
Let me just... So the first question is from Adam. He asks, how can you make a false image as powerful as a real image to trigger an action or emotion? He asks, for example, in a killing scene where an actor cannot recall an image from real memory, so they obviously haven't killed someone in real life before.
Right. Well, it seems to me that first you start with killing a bug. We've all killed many things. I think that as you actually kill the bug, if you imagine that the person that you're killing is a bug, that is one way. That is a way that a racist would kill someone of another race. It's a different idea. So the question is not how do I recall killing, but what, who, or what am I killing? And that's going to help you to an emotional understanding of that. So it really depends on the relationship. So if I'm going to kill someone that I suspect of being a child molester, I can do that pretty easily, because what I want to do is to make that person suffer the way children have suffered. I think that killing is also trying to eliminate something or someone from your own psyche. So sometimes you're killing a part of yourself that you hate. So it's not that easy a question to answer. Imaginatively, I think that we can all imagine killing Hitler. We can all imagine, I think, killing an animal that is attacking us. So it really depends on the image of the thing that you are killing more than your image of killing itself. Does that make any sense to you? Please respond if it doesn't, or if you need further understandings of that.
Melanie asks, is the super scene always comprised of an aggressor and a defender, for lack of better terms?
Yes, but those roles switch, as you saw in the super scene that we just looked at. It really depends as people move through. And the good thing about it is it makes the actor understand that even though we may appear passive on the surface, we are not passive underneath. We have instincts that we repress, which makes somebody passive, or that we don't repress, which makes things a little more aggressive. I think it is the relationship between the two actors that becomes richer as a result of it, not just as a result of the action, but also as a result of the physical contact. Just that, the chemistry of the physical contact creates an emotional response. And pretty soon the actors are so together doing what they're doing in this sort of martial arts dance that the audience goes away and everything but the two of them go away. And then what we do is we take a lot of that super scene and we move it into what you might think of as blocking or staging, keeping key elements. The actors can still work within the staging because they understand what's actually going on in the scene. Sometimes we'll take the dance and make it a map for the scene, so the actors don't ever actually touch each other for a minute and they just walk it. Or we make it, there's a lot of different ways that we adjust the super scene when it goes into performance. Thank you, Melanie.
Great. Next question from Steve. Listening to what you were saying earlier, so he's asking, the focus in a scene should be the action over the emotion.
Well, yeah, because emotion gives birth to action. So unless you have, and you can start it kind of at any one of those image to emo to action, you can start it at any one of those places and they will move each other. Action is a result of image and emotion, so wherever you start, you're going to end up at the same place. It's a circle. It's not a linear thing. And the focus is on interaction. What am I doing to my partner? What is my partner doing to me that makes me respond in a particular way? I think that Declan Donnellan's book, Target for the Actor, expresses this beautifully as to how we work responsively in a Meisner-esque sort of way with our partner, as opposed to always keeping our thoughts on what am I got to do now. That's one of the things a super scene does. It forces you to forget about what you got to do and forces you to actually just do.
Next question,
yeah.
Andrea, is we're talking a lot about super scenes and the theatre. How do you take super scenes into screen work, and what would be the difference in modulating your performance for theatre and screen?
Well, you know, screen work is in general, we have to think about this for a minute, because a lot of screen work is very physical. I mean, you're riding horses and you're jumping off of them, or you're running after people. That is a part of filmmaking that I think we forget. Well, often when we are talking about, as actors, about screen work, we're talking about what about my close-ups or the two shots, and I think that the close-ups are about the repression of action, and the more action that is repressed, the more you think, the more your mind and body are connected. And as we all know, the camera sees you think. So if it sees you trying not to do something, if it sees you repressing, it's far more interesting than if you're thinking about your next line, or you're thinking about how am I supposed to feel, or what am I supposed to do next. I think that it works brilliantly once you get the concept. That's another thing about super scenes. You don't have to super scene everything you do. It's kind of like viewpoints, if you know what those are, in that once an actor has done it, they have a bigger vocabulary of understanding of action and interaction, and their focus goes off of who am I supposed to be and puts it much more on how do I open myself to do. I think super scenes are what Stanislavsky would finally have ended up with. I may not have said that, but I think he would have, because once the repression of the hoop skirts are gone and the Victorian ways of dealing with each other are gone, we have the physical alive, which is alive very much in our own contemporary society, and which I think many practitioners of Stanislavsky haven't caught up with yet.
Great. Next question, which sort of leads quite closely onto what you were just speaking about. Michael asks, so what is the camera really looking for then? Because you mentioned the close-up.
The camera's looking for thought.
He mentioned something also about, you were talking about mirror neurons in the theatre and the audience picking up on the actor trying to feel something.
No, to do something.
Yeah, but as in that the audience will pick up if the actor is trying to emote.
If the actor is trying to get something from his or her partner.
Yeah, but the audience can also tell that that actor is trying to emote. Like,
oh, yes. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yes, that's true.
Does that work the same on the camera?
Well, you know, I've often thought about this because I did a lot of camera casting. I think that the audience in a movie are sitting overwhelmed by the image of the actors on the screen, and they become, through mirror neurons, they enter into the screen and become one of the characters or all of the characters, and that is one of the reasons that the actors on screen need to do so little, because the audience is so involved and predicting in their own bodies what the actor on the screen is doing, thinking, being. The worst thing that a screen actor can do is get in the way of the audience's ability to imagine themselves into the piece. So a lot of times screen actors are told that less is more, which is really an old, tired, hackneyed phrase, but in a way is true. The question is, what is less? And I think less means not leading the audience to judge the character or judge what's going to happen, but allowing them to be a part of it as it exists. The actor's responsibility to the audience in that case is for the actor to simply be in the doing, in the relationship, and not worry about showing who or what they're trying to be. Those things are in the given circumstances, as in Harry Potter. I am a wizard, and therefore all of that physical way of being, all of that powerful way of being, I am already using as an archetype. I don't have to worry about showing anything. Also, the film already plays music underneath you and puts you on a horse. You don't have to pretend to ride a horse. You are riding a horse. You don't have to pretend that your butt aches. Your butt aches. You don't have to pretend to admire the sunset. There's a sunset. I think that unless you're working blue screen, where those images are going to be so important to you, the film does so much for you.